What if I told you that the most shocking discovery in a quiet suburban neighborhood wasn't about crime, scandal, or danger, but about something far more profound? What if the very assumptions we make about people based on appearances could blind us to the most beautiful acts of human resilience? This is the story of Miriam Watson, a 72-year-old widow whose sharp eyes and restless curiosity led her down a path that would forever change not just her understanding of her neighbors, but her entire perspective on what it means to truly see someone. Every single night, like clockwork, a sleek black luxury car glides through the quiet streets of Brookvale, carrying secrets that would shake this peaceful community to its core. Behind the wheel sits James Harrow, once a pillar of society, now a man wrapped in mystery. Beside him, a young girl named Amara, her bright yellow dress the only splash of color in an otherwise dark tale. Their destination? An abandoned garage that most neighbors had forgotten existed. But Miriam Watson hadn't forgotten, and what she was about to discover would challenge everything she thought she knew about the people living right under her nose. The story begins on Maple Street, where the American dream seemed to have found its perfect home. This wasn't just any neighborhood, it was the kind of place where children's laughter echoed through tree-lined streets, where barbecue smoke drifted lazily over perfectly manicured lawns, and where everyone knew their neighbors' names, their dogs' breeds, and their weekend routines. Miriam Watson had been the unofficial guardian of this tranquil world for nearly 3 decades. From her post by the large bay window in her living room, she had watched generations of families grow up, move away, and sometimes return with families of their own. She had seen love stories bloom over shared garden fences, witnessed neighborhood disputes resolved over coffee, and had been there through countless celebrations and sorrows. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the mystery that was about to unfold right outside her window. It started on a Tuesday evening in late spring. The sun was setting in that golden way that made everything look like a painting, and Miriam was enjoying her usual evening ritual of chamomile tea and people watching when she saw it, a car that didn't belong. The vehicle was stunning, a vintage black sedan with chrome details that caught the fading light like diamonds. It moved with the kind of smooth, silent grace that spoke of expensive engineering and careful maintenance. But it wasn't just the car that caught Miriam's attention. It was the deliberate way it moved, as if its driver knew exactly where he was going in a neighborhood where he clearly didn't belong. As the car drew closer, Miriam leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. The driver was a black man in his mid-30s, impeccably dressed in what even from a distance appeared to be an expensive suit. His posture was straight, confident, but there was something in the way he held his shoulders that suggested he was carrying more than just the weight of his tailored jacket. But it was the passenger that truly captured Miriam's attention. A young girl, no more than 7 or 8, sat beside him. Even through the car's tinted windows, Miriam could see the bright yellow of her dress, a cheerful, sunny color that seemed to contradict the serious atmosphere inside the vehicle. The car slowed as it approached the end of Maple Street, where an old garage stood like a forgotten relic from another era. The building had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember, its paint peeling, its windows boarded up, its door hanging askew on rusted hinges. It was the kind of eyesore that most neighbors had learned to ignore, a blemish on an otherwise perfect streetscape. But as Miriam watched, something extraordinary happened. The garage door, which she had assumed was permanently stuck, began to creak open. The black car glided inside, and the door closed behind it with a finality that sent a chill down Miriam's spine. For a moment, she sat frozen, her teacup halfway to her lips. Had she really seen what she thought she had seen? A wealthy man and a young girl taking shelter in an abandoned garage? In broad daylight? On her street? She waited, expecting the car to emerge again, perhaps having used the garage simply as a turnaround point. But minutes passed. Then an hour, then 2. The garage remained silent, its door firmly closed, offering no clues about what was happening inside. As darkness fell over Brookvale, Miriam found herself unable to move from her window. Something about the scene had captured her imagination in a way that she couldn't quite explain. There was a story here, she was sure of it, a mystery that demanded to be solved. The next evening, Miriam was ready. She had positioned herself by the window earlier than usual. Her dinner eaten quickly, her evening programs forgotten. At exactly 7:23 p.m., she had checked her watch the previous night. The black car appeared again. This time, Miriam was prepared to observe every detail. The man behind the wheel looked tired. She noticed his expensive suit slightly rumpled as if he had been wearing it for too long. The girl beside him was still in her yellow dress, but now Miriam could see that it was the same dress from the night before. The same dress, in the same bright yellow, but somehow it looked different, less cheerful, more forlorn. Again, the garage door opened to receive them, and again, it closed with that same ominous finality. But this time, Miriam was watching for something else. She kept her vigil long into the night, dozing fitfully in her chair, startling awake at every sound. At 5:47 a.m., just as the first light of dawn was touching the eastern sky, the garage door opened again. The black car emerged, moving with the same deliberate grace as before. Through her window, Miriam watched as the man and girl drove away, disappearing into the early morning mist like ghosts. But they weren't ghosts. They were real people, with real lives, real stories, and real reasons for their strange behavior. And Miriam Watson was determined to find out what those reasons were. As days turned into weeks, the pattern became as regular as clockwork. Every evening at 7:23 p.m., the black car would arrive. Every morning at 5:47 a.m., it would depart. The man never deviated from his routine, never interacted with anyone in the neighborhood, never gave any indication of what he was doing in that abandoned garage with a young girl. Miriam's curiosity evolved into something deeper, a genuine concern that kept her awake at night and distracted during the day. She found herself researching the garage's history, learning that it had once been a mechanic's shop owned by a man named Giuseppe Torino, who had closed it down when he retired to Florida 15 years earlier. The building had been empty ever since, slowly deteriorating while the neighborhood around it flourished. But why would someone choose to spend their nights in such a place? And more importantly, why would they bring a child there? The questions multiplied in Miriam's mind like puzzle pieces that refused to fit together. She began to notice details that others might miss. The way the man's suit, while expensive, seemed to be the same one every night. The way the girl's bright yellow dress, while clean, appeared to be her only outfit. The way neither of them ever seemed to carry bags or belongings, as if they were traveling light by necessity rather than choice. There was something heartbreaking about the girl, something that tugged at Miriam's maternal instincts despite having no children of her own. The child moved with a quiet dignity that seemed far too mature for her age, and there was a sadness in her posture that no child should have to carry. As autumn approached, Miriam's concern deepened. The nights were getting colder, and she couldn't stop thinking about that little girl sleeping in an unheated garage. She began to imagine scenarios, each more troubling than the last. Was the man hiding from something? Was the girl in danger? Were they running from someone or something? The rational part of her mind tried to come up with innocent explanations. Perhaps they were homeless and using the garage as temporary shelter. Perhaps the man was down on his luck and too proud to ask for help. Perhaps there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for their behavior that she simply wasn't seeing. But the more she watched, the more convinced she became that something was wrong. Very wrong. One evening in mid-October, as the leaves on Maple Street had turned brilliant shades of orange and gold, Miriam witnessed something that changed everything. She was at her usual post by the window when she saw a second car, another expensive vehicle. This one a sleek silver sedan, pull up to the garage. A man emerged from the silver car, and even from a distance, Miriam could see that he was agitated. He moved with the sharp, aggressive movements of someone who was angry, possibly dangerous. He approached the garage and began pounding on the door with his fist. The door opened, and the man from the black car appeared. What followed was a heated conversation that Miriam couldn't hear but could certainly see. The stranger was pointing, gesturing angrily, while the man from the black car, James, she had learned his name was James, seemed to be trying to calm him down. The confrontation lasted only a few minutes, but it was intense. The stranger finally stormed back to his car and drove away, leaving James standing alone in front of the garage. Even from a distance, Miriam could see that he was shaken by the encounter. This was the moment that transformed Miriam's curiosity into something more urgent. Whatever was happening in that garage, it involved other people, people who seemed threatening, dangerous even, and caught in the middle of it all was a little girl who deserved better than to be living in fear. That night, Miriam made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out the truth, no matter what it took. She was going to help that little girl, even if it meant confronting her own fears and prejudices in the process. The next morning, Miriam did something she had never done before. She called the police. "I'd like to report some suspicious activity," she told the dispatcher, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "There's a man and a young girl who have been staying in an abandoned garage in my neighborhood. I'm concerned for the child's welfare." The response was polite but underwhelming. An officer would be by to take a statement, they assured her, but unless there was evidence of immediate danger, there wasn't much they could do. People had the right to stay wherever they chose, even if it seemed unusual to their neighbors. Miriam hung up the phone feeling frustrated and more alone than ever. If the police couldn't help, then it was up to her to find another way to reach out to James and Amara, for she had learned the girl's name through careful observation and a few discreet inquiries. That evening, as she watched the familiar black car pull into the garage, Miriam made another decision. She was going to approach them directly. She was going to offer help, even if she wasn't sure exactly what kind of help they needed. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. 2 days later, as she was tending to her small front garden, she saw James and Amara walking down the street. They were on foot this time, moving slowly, and for the first time since she had been watching them, they seemed approachable. Miriam's heart pounded as she stood up, brushing the dirt from her gardening gloves. This was it. This was her chance to finally get some answers, to finally offer the help that her instincts told her they desperately needed. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying across the quiet street. "Are you James?" The man stopped, his body tensing as he turned to face her. Up close, Miriam could see that he was younger than she had thought, probably in his early 30s, with kind eyes that held a deep sadness. The little girl beside him, Amara, looked up at Miriam with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Yes," James replied cautiously. "I'm James Harrow. And you are?" "Miriam Watson," she said, extending her hand. "I live in the White House with the blue shutters. I've seen you and your daughter around the neighborhood." "She's not my daughter," James said quickly, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, she's." "It's complicated." Miriam nodded, trying to project warmth and understanding. "I imagine it is. Listen, I don't mean to pry, but I couldn't help but notice that you've been staying in the old garage. I wanted you to know that if you need anything, food, blankets, or just someone to talk to, I'm right here." For a moment, James looked like he might cry. His composure, which had seemed so steady from a distance, cracked just slightly, revealing the exhaustion and desperation beneath. "That's very kind of you," he said finally, "but we're managing just fine." "And are you?" Miriam asked gently. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you could use a friend." James glanced down at Amara, who was watching the exchange with wide, intelligent eyes. There was something in the way he looked at her, protective, loving, but also deeply worried, that told Miriam everything she needed to know about the true nature of their relationship. "Mrs. Watson," James said slowly, "I appreciate your concern. I really do. But our situation is complicated. It's probably better if we keep to ourselves." "Complicated how?" Miriam pressed. "Are you in some kind of trouble? Because if you are, there might be people who can help. The community here is stronger than you might think." James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The community," he repeated. "Yes, I remember the community. I used to be part of it. Once upon a time, The word sent a chill through Miriam. There was something familiar about James, something that nagged at the edges of her memory. Had she seen him before? Had they met somewhere? "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't understand." James looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his options. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision. "My name is James Harrow," he said. "I used to own Harrow Industries. I used to live in the big house on Elmwood Drive. I used to be somebody in this town." The recognition hit Miriam like a physical blow. James Harrow. Of course. The successful businessman who had been featured in the local newspaper countless times. The philanthropist who had donated generously to local charities. The man who had seemed to have everything: success, wealth, respect. But what happened? Miriam asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" James's smile was bitter. "I lost everything," he said simply. "Bad investments, worse decisions, and a market crash that wiped out what was left. I went from millionaire to homeless in the space of 6 months. And Amara? My neighbor's daughter," James said, his voice softening as he looked down at the girl. "Her mother died in a car accident. She had no other family. And I couldn't let her go into the system. So I've been taking care of her." The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. But the picture they formed was nothing like what Miriam had imagined. This wasn't a story of crime or danger, it was a story of loss, of pride, of a man trying to protect a child while dealing with his own devastating circumstances. "James," Miriam said gently, "why didn't you ask for help? There are programs, resources." "With what?" James asked. "No identification, no address, no way to prove I can provide for her. The system would take her away from me, and she's already lost so much." Miriam felt her heart breaking for this man and this little girl who had been struggling alone while she had been watching from her window, imagining all sorts of sinister scenarios. "Come inside," she said suddenly. "Both of you, right now." James started to protest, but Miriam held up her hand. "I'm not taking no for an answer," she said firmly. "You're going to come into my house. You're going to sit at my kitchen table, and we're going to figure this out together. No arguments." For a moment, James looked like he might refuse. Then Amara tugged gently on his sleeve. "Please, James," she said quietly. "I'm tired of being cold." The simple honesty of the child's words broke through James's defenses. He nodded slowly, and Miriam felt a surge of triumph mixed with profound sadness. As they walked toward her house, Miriam couldn't help but think about how wrong she had been about everything. She had spent months watching, suspecting, imagining scenarios that had nothing to do with reality. The truth was so much simpler and so much more heartbreaking than anything she had conjured up in her mind. But as she opened her front door and ushered James and Amara inside, she also felt something else: hope. Because sometimes, the most important discoveries happen not when we're looking for mysteries to solve, but when we're ready to open our hearts to the people right in front of us. The conversation that followed in Miriam's warm kitchen lasted for hours. James told her everything about his failed business, about the creditors who were still hunting him, about his determination to keep Amara safe even if it meant living in an abandoned garage. Amara, gradually warming up to Miriam's gentle questions, shared her own story of loss and the fear that had become her constant companion. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Miriam's kitchen table, a plan had begun to take shape. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but it was a plan that offered something that had been missing from all of their lives: hope. "You'll stay here," Miriam said firmly. "Both of you. We'll figure out the legal issues, deal with the creditors, and get you back on your feet." "Mrs. Watson," James began, but Miriam cut him off. "Miriam," she corrected, "and I mean it. You're not going back to that garage. Not tonight. Not ever." As they prepared for bed in Miriam's spare rooms, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. This morning, she had been a lonely widow watching the world from her window. Tonight, She was part of a family she never could have imagined. The mystery of the black car and the abandoned garage had been solved. But in its place was something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that sometimes the most important discoveries come not from watching from a distance, but from having the courage to reach out and connect with the people who need us most. 3 months later, as winter gave way to spring, Miriam stood at her kitchen window watching James and Amara play in the backyard. James had found work, modest but steady, and Amara was thriving in her new school. The garage at the end of Maple Street had been demolished, replaced by a small garden that the neighbors had collectively decided to create. The sleek black car was gone, sold to help pay off some of James's debts. In its place was a sensible sedan that James drove to work each morning and that brought him home to a family dinner every evening. Sometimes, Miriam thought, the best mysteries are the ones that lead us not to shocking revelations, but to the simple truth that we all need each other more than we're willing to admit. The real discovery wasn't about uncovering secrets, it was about uncovering the capacity for love, forgiveness, and second chances that exists in every community, waiting for the right moment to bloom. As she watched James help Amara with her homework at the kitchen table, Miriam smiled. She had spent so much time watching from her window, looking for mysteries to solve. She had never imagined that the greatest mystery of all would be discovering that her own heart was big enough to hold a family she had never expected to find. The story of Maple Street had come full circle, but in the best possible way. What had begun as a tale of suspicion and fear had transformed into something beautiful, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries happen when we stop watching from a distance and start participating in the lives of the people around us. And in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Brookvale, where everyone thought they knew everyone else's business, the most important business of all turned out to be the simple act of caring for one another. What started as a mystery had become a miracle. What began with suspicion had ended with love, and what had looked like an ending was actually just the beginning of something wonderful. Sometimes, the best stories are the ones that remind us that happy endings are possible, even when they come in forms we never expected. Sometimes, the most important thing we can do is simply pay attention to the people around us and be ready to help when help is needed. The black car was gone, but the lessons it had taught would last forever. In a world that often feels divided and suspicious, the story of James, Amara, and Miriam was a reminder that understanding and compassion can bridge any gap, heal any wound, and transform any life. And in the end, that might be the most important discovery of all.